Today, we're going to talk about a massive, fundamental shift in global power. It's an idea from a veteran diplomat, Kishore Mahbubani, who argues that the era of Western dominance is not just ending, it's already over. And he says this rebalancing is absolutely irreversible. Right off the bat, he sets the stage with this quote. And it's a stark warning, right? He's not talking about some abstract theory here. He's talking about the brutal, real-world game of power, where nations have to be incredibly smart and, frankly, a little cunning just to stay afloat. The stakes are as high as they get. And it's so important to know who's making this case. This isn't some academic in an ivory tower. Mahbubani has been in the trenches. I mean, the guy has actually presided over the UN Security Council. He's seen firsthand how the gears of global power really turn. So his perspective? It comes from being in the room where it happens. Okay, so let's get right into the heart of his argument. He kicks things off by showing just how much the world has already changed, and he uses a few key stats that are, well, they're pretty much impossible to ignore. Just think about the sheer speed of this. In 1980, which is well within the lifetime of a lot of us, the European Union's economy was 10 times bigger than China's. 10 times. Fast forward to today, and they're about the same size, but look at the projection for 2050. The EU is set to be just half the size of China's economy. This isn't some tiny little adjustment. It's a genuine tectonic shift in the global order. And this next one is just as stunning, especially when you think about the history here. The UK, the former colonial power, had an economy 4 times larger than India's as recently as 1990. But just last year, India's economy actually surpassed the UK's. And by 2050, India is projected to be 4 times bigger than Britain. That is a complete 180-degree reversal. And just to show you this isn't only a China and India story, take a look at Germany versus the ASEAN countries. That's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. In the year 2000, Germany was 3 times bigger. Today, they're on par. And by 2050, Germany will be half the size of this really dynamic region. It just perfectly illustrates this broad, structural rebalancing of the entire world economy. So when you see these massive, undeniable shifts in economic power, it begs a pretty obvious question, doesn't it? Why are the big institutions that are supposed to govern our world, like the IMF and the UN, why are they still structured like it's 1945? And this brings us to the next piece of Mahbubani's analysis, the deep, systematic, and honestly pretty clever resistance from the West, especially Europe, to actually adapt to this new reality. They're clinging to the past. Let's start with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It's the organization that helps keep the global economy stable. Now, if you go to their website, they say it very clearly. Voting power is supposed to reflect a country's economic weight in the world. It's a principle of fairness. But is that what's really going on? No, not even close. As we just saw, the EU and China have roughly the same slice of the global economic pie, about 17% each. But now look at their voting power. The EU commands a whopping 26% of the votes, while China gets just 6%. This flies directly in the face of the IMF's own rules, and it's maintained by what Mahbubani calls Europe's brilliant and artful resistance to change. You see this same resistance over at the UN Security Council, which is arguably the most powerful political body on the planet. Mahbubani, having been there, says it's basically run by the 5 permanent members. He even tells the story where a French ambassador just dismissed the 10 other elected members as tourists, who were trying to rearrange the furniture in their living room. I mean, that attitude tells you everything you need to know. And this slide really puts that power into perspective. Europe, with 2 permanent seats, that's the UK and France, controls 40% of the permanent votes. This, despite representing a smaller and smaller piece of the world's population and economic power. Mahbubani then brings up the question of legitimacy, and he points to this absolutely brutal assessment from one of Britain's own top commentators, Martin Wolf. So if this is what's happening in the country, Mahbubani asks, on what grounds is it still clinging to a permanent seat that's meant for a great power of today and tomorrow? So this all leads to the final and most critical part of the whole argument. The West is now facing a really stark choice, and the decision it makes is going to define its role for the rest of the 21st century. And to really get this choice, Mahbubani uses a simple but really powerful analogy. He says, think of our small, interconnected world of 8 billion people as just one single global village.
Now, in this global village, the West makes up only 12% of the population. Just 12%. 88% of the villagers live somewhere else. So as a tiny minority, it is overwhelmingly in the West's own best interest to make sure the village is well-run, stable, and governed by rules that everyone sees as fair.
And that gets us to the core contradiction. At home, Western countries praise democracy and representation. They say it's the best way to run a society. But when it comes to the global village, they fight tooth and nail to protect their own outsized, undemocratic privileges. And that's just not a position you can hold for long. And this creates a crystal clear dilemma for places like the UN Security Council. They have two options. Option one, they can keep their outdated structure with Britain and France as permanent members, and in doing so, lose all credibility with the 88% majority. Or option two, they can change their makeup to reflect the real world, and by doing that, they can keep their credibility and stay relevant. They can't have it both ways. And so that brings us to the final, really provocative question that this whole analysis leaves us with. What's the smartest path forward for the West? Is it to fight a losing battle against the tides of history, clinging to old privileges until it just becomes irrelevant? Or is it to be wise, to adapt, to make room for new powers, and to find a new, sustainable, and respected place for itself in the world that's already here?